Hello and welcome to the second podcast, a second episode of the Chronicles of Demeron podcast. Once again, my name is Chris, and I'm going to be kind of hosting this. I don't know if I can say that. And then I'm joined today by Graydon.
Hello, I'm Graydon. I play Finn the Changeling Warlock in this campaign.
Yeah. So today we're going to be talking about the city of Cureron, and so we'll go briefly over the city of Cureron, but it's going to be less of a overview in this episode than it was in the last one because this kind of city is best talked about with questions in mind, or with over the questions as opposed to over the overview. So yeah, so Cureron is the capital city of Demeron. It was built by Brindom during his rule as kind of his place where he lived, and then over time it just kind of stuck the same as being the capital city of Demeron. And so it was where Amon built his palace, and it was where Asmodeus sat during the second calamity. It's kind of where he made his throne, and now they're stuck as the capital city. That's kind of a little bit there of it being important throughout all the ages. Yeah, so it's like the largest city in Demeron, second most magical place, second only to Arcanus, and it's filled with all sorts of races, people, businesses. It also has the most temples of any city, so all temples to all the deities can be found in Cureron, as well as just tons of like businesses for everything. Has a port town, all these things, or port in general, all these things like that. So yeah, I think that's just kind of the general overview I wanted to do. So we can just go ahead and start in the questions, because that'll fill a majority of the rest of the information in. So take it away, Graydon.
All right. I know you mentioned that there were a lot of races and different kinds of races in there. What are some of the more common ones? Is it primarily human, primarily elf? Like, what kind of races are most prevalent?
So in Cureron specifically, it's a majority human. Across Demeron as a whole, it's primarily humans and elves. But Cureron specifically is human, with second being elves, and then followed by dwarves and gnomes. No, not gnomes, halflings. And then kind of gnomes, dragonborns, and half-elves kind of all have the same population density, followed by tieflings. And then last but not least, there's the occasional like goblin or full orc or half orc found in Cureron. Yeah, general spread. None of them are really like in higher social standing than another. Just the elves, as I talked about in the previous episode, kind of see themselves as in higher social standing, but otherwise there's no really extra social standing from any one race to another.
Awesome. So with a city this large, it's obviously going to be cut up a little bit into different sections or districts. What kind of districts are there in this city?
So you got your basic districts. You got the temple district, right, where there's all the temples. Then you got the marketing district, which is called the Solar Plaza, kind of big market square. And then you have some more residential areas. So the higher class residential areas would be the northern and southern wards. North ward would be for kind of mid to high level nobles, and south ward and a couple small businesses, and then south ward would be kind of the more common folk and a few small businesses again. You have the central district, which kind of just is primarily businesses, and then you have the Skyfire district, which would be like the high tier nobles. It has very restricted access, so it has like mages, it has the Cobalt Well, it has Tarsington Citadel, it has the military base in Cureron, things like that. And then there's the slums, which are just outside the city, but they're still kind of part of the city, which is more where the kind of lower class and impoverished people live. Again, small businesses, but mostly just residential areas for lower class people who need to work in the city but don't have the money to buy a decent house.
That's really interesting. You talked about the Skyfire district, about how it's full of important peoples. So it must be where the people who are in charge are from. Who exactly is in charge of this city?
So the city is run by the Chamber of Demeron and their appointed nobles. The Chamber of Demeron is a group of 8, which I think I briefly talked about them in the previous episode.
Hey guys, this is Chris in post. I just realized that I didn't actually talk about who's on the Chamber of Demeron in either of the episodes, and so I'm going to quickly go over that here just for your information. So the members of the Chamber of Demeron would be Trissa Falline. She's the representative of Hinia, and she's in charge of trade and immigration across all of Demeron. Trissa is a female gnome. And then the representative for Feld would be a man by the name of Belgarn Aminil. He's a dwarf, and he's in charge of mining, and he's the treasurer for Demeron. Then we have the representative for Valdia, Gelris Melindria. She's a female halfling, and she's in charge of fishing as a whole, as well as she's the lawmaster. The representative for Frora would be Caleb Rokern, and he's in charge of agriculture. He's a human. In charge of military and defense is the representative for Sotilia. His name is Zavudash, and he's a male half-orc. The representative for Netzvia is Arlen Tonwald. He's a gold dragonborn, and he is in charge of arcane practices and education. And then the representative for Ulvia is Samea Oriel. She's a tiefling, and she's in charge of information gathering across the province, as well as across the continent, as well as outside of Demeron. And then the representative for Drobea would be Zainala Duvamil, and she's in charge of the internal political issues, so making sure that any kind of disputes between politicians and things like that are resolved by her, are resolved in general. So yeah, just hopefully that's informational, and yeah.
But yeah, they're in charge of the city. They appoint people to run the smaller aspects, and they make the laws for not only the city but also the continent as a whole. And then other kind of figures of importance that have some pretty decent sway would be Headmaster Elric Lee Gallo of the Cobalt Well. He kind of has some say in things that happen. Vadra Saphir as the Blackstaff would be another important person. She kind of manages. She's second in command for the Order of Magists, as well as she kind of runs a security force. Another big influence would be Keldry Volulis. He kind of just dabbles his hand in all parts of Demeron because of just the person that he is.
That's really cool. I know you mentioned the Blackstaff. I believe they're a guild. So what other guilds are they, and what do they all do?
So the Blackstaff herself is the head of the Force Grey Guild, which for listeners, this city is kind of loosely based around, and some elements are stolen from Waterdeep. So that's where some of these similarities draw. Yeah, she kind of is in charge of Force Grey, which is a special task force to help defend the city. Other guilds, there's the small guilds like the Brewers Guild, the Crafters Guild, the Woodworkers Guild, things like that. But then there's the larger legal guilds, such as the Order of Magists, which are a group dedicated specifically to watching and making sure that people who can practice magic aren't going overboard with it, right? So I talked about in the last episode a little bit about how Amon put a ban on magic, so you have to have a specific permit in order to do magic. They're not that strict, but they're just making sure that you aren't reviving corpses or murdering people every night with fireballs and stuff. So it's kind of their goal. Another group would be the Cobalt Soul, which they're kind of a religion slash guild. They're a group dedicated to Ioun, and their goal is to collect and gain knowledge to make sure that all knowledge is protected, and then the knowledge that shouldn't be public is kind of kept locked away in a secret space. That's kind of their job. There is the Emerald Enclave, which is a small group dedicated to protecting the balance of society and nature. making sure neither one comes into too much conflict and oversteps the other's boundaries. The Force Grey is a specific group that I said before that the Black Staff organizes, and they're kind of dedicated to protecting the city in times of great trouble, such as a dragon attack or something. And then the Gentium, which recently there were 2 factions of the Gentium, but as of more recent events, the second faction disappeared. But there was the Gentium. They were an old adventuring group that kind of settled down in Cureron, started doing dabble in illegal business, but now are legit. So those are kind of the legal guilds. And then there's a couple like smaller crimes guilds, which obviously aren't legal, right? So if you know anything about Exandria, there's the Clasp from Tal'Dorei and the Myriad from Wildmount, and they both kind of have their foot in the door here in Cureron and trying to organize some sort of crime. But the real crime guild across Demeron as a whole is the Shadowstalkers, which are quite terrifying in and of themselves, and no one really knows who their leader is yet as of recent. They're trying to figure out. There's rumors of a cloaked lord who runs the Shadowstalkers in secret, but no one really knows who they are or who that person is. And then the last kind of big guild would be the White Lotus. They're a very powerful guild dedicated to protecting Demeron and Exandria as a whole from extraplanar threats. But they're very secretive and kind of don't like to reveal themselves. We'll probably do a whole nother episode on them.
That's really interesting. So, with the city this big, there's got to be some sort of landmarks, some awesome places to go, some notable locations. What would be some of those locations?
The Solar Plaza would be one. It is a beautiful sight to see, just very well decorated and just tons of people doing business and things like that. It's very interesting and very cool. Another one would be the Skyfire District. Is beautiful to watch for sunrises, because it looks like the walls are actually on fire with the way that the stone and the sunlight reflects off of it. Thus the name. The Temple District, the largest temple there being the Temple of Pelor. The statue of Pelor on top has a glass orb that when the sun hits it at noon, it actually shines a massive light across the entire city, which is quite stellar to see. A couple other nice places would be the Courier's Cup, as the probably most popular tavern there, run by a dwarf named Malthron, and it's kind of infamous for their signature drink, the Elemental. Those are kind of the main areas that are tourist attractions. But of course, there's a couple other taverns in and about and other places to visit, but those are kind of the main areas.
That's really interesting. So you mentioned Pelor being the de facto religion, the most popular one. What other religions are very prevalent?
There is a pretty decent temple for most, or for all of the prime deities. None for the betrayer gods. The other, I guess 3 big ones would be the, as determined by their temples, would be Bahamut, the Platinum Dragon, the Raven Queen, and Cord are all kind of the 4 big, along with Pelor, are the 4 big ones that are commonly worshipped across everybody. But of course, in times of harvest, Melora gets a lot of business, or the Moonweaver is often quite popular among the elves. And yeah, different things. All the gods are on equal footing. Mostly there's just those 4 are kind of have bigger temples and so are often visited a little bit more.
That's awesome. So, with the city this big, they have to have some sort of defenses and whatnot. What are the defenses and armies like?
So the walls themselves are quite tall and impenetrable and well watched, so they're not the easiest to just walk into if you're not friendly. But other the standard guards across all of Demeron would be called the Rose Guards. Think your default basic town's guard in any fantasy setting. And these guys they're called the Rose Guards for their signature red chainmail armor. And then the actual military of Demeron would be called the Thunder Troops, and they're named that due to an intimidation tactic they use to with the loud marching and banging weapons against specifically designed shields, and it sounds like thunder rolling over the hills to terrify their enemies. Their cavalry is a lot of griffin riders, which can strike a little bit, be an extra little intimidation tactic there. But the ultimate defense would be the Fireflight Guardians, who protect the Fireflight district, as well as like if there's any sort of big hassle out in the city, they can get there. Rumor has it that they can fly, but if you claim that, many people think you're crazy because no one's really seen it happen in the last while. As well as the Demeron has a couple, like a sizable sea fleet, but their sky fleet is a wonder to behold as well.
That's awesome. So with defenses like that, there must be a lot of monsters roaming around. So what kind of monsters populate the areas around Cureron?
In the fields in and around outside of Cureron, and especially Sotilia, there is a lot more like burrowing type creatures and nighttime more creatures, because during the day it's relatively traveled and the creatures have learned, hey, we don't want to be attacked, we want to go out at night or stay underground. So there's like bullets are quite common. Every once in a while you get the occasional like large group of undead, which we don't know where they come from, but they just show up. Every once in a while there's a roaming band of orcs, things like that. Just more common like field enemies.
That's really good to know. Always got to know what to watch out for. I know you've mentioned Exandria multiple times. So what are the relationships between Demeron and the other continents?
I talked about this a little bit in the last one, but again, the Chamber of Demeron and Demeron as a whole are in good standing with Tal'Dorei. They made a deal in the past that kind of helped defense, like shared defense both ways, and they're very close allies and friend nations. Marquette and Demeron, especially Henia, do a lot of trading, and so they're quite friends. There's no ill will between Demeron and Isilra. They don't really contact, but they're not against each other. And then Wildmount, they don't really talk too much since the border's closed, and so there's not really much friendship going on there. Yeah.
Well, that is actually all the questions I have for you today.
Alrighty. Well, there you go. So thank you very much for listening to this second episode. We hope that gives you a little bit of insight into the city of Cureron. And thank you for joining me, Graydon.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Hey guys, Chris here, just to do an outro because I never know how to do an outro in the actual recording of the podcast. But we hope it was very informative, and we want to thank you for listening. And so goodbye.